Parents can, with a legally binding will, dispose of their property inside or outside the family as they see that they don't have to leave anything to their children if they don't want to. There might be a court case about that, but what can you do? Wedding gifts from parents to married children are informal and usually do not represent a significant portion of the parent's wealth, except for whoever pays for the wedding itself. That might be expensive. Okay. Next, getting to one of the more important values. One's primary identity, social standing, and occupation come from kinship, belonging to a particular family, and its economic status. Across the page, across the column. One's primary identity and social standing come from one's chosen occupation, especially the income it generates. One's identity can also be derived from a spouse's standing. If you have a high social standing spouse, generates good income, etc. So, kinship, that's a big social value in the Mediterranean world. In ancient times and even today. One of the more entertaining ways to study Mediterranean life and social values. Read or take a look at, and you've probably seen this movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Oh, that's funny. That's a great movie. But that is the contest of Mediterranean values, Mediterranean person, Mediterranean family, with a young woman who is much more North Americanized and has modern values, and she's tussling who to date, who to marry, how to get along with the father, who thinks that he's the pater familias, the Greek father, but he's really not. And there's a contest between the wife and the husband about this. The wife says at one point in the story, my husband thinks he is the head of the family and he controls everything. But the wife is the neck, and the neck can turn the head any way it wants. Clever. That's Mediterranean values up against modern life. And it's quite a contest. It can turn out well, but sometimes not. Okay. So, one other thing I want to say about kinship is that it pretty much sets a person's life up from the beginning. What you're going to do, there's no doubt about what you're going to be when you grow up. You're going to do your father's thing. If he's a farmer, he's a farmer. If he has a business, say it's an artisan, you're going to do that. If he's a banker, you do that. And this is a very important thing in the ancient world. It provides a lot of stability for society, and I think it provides, in some way, with some detriment, it provides a path for young people to expect and follow. You don't have to worry year after year, what am I going to be when I grow up, what am I going to do, which in modern life is urged them to get into junior high school or so, and have these aptitude exams for different occupations. And people are always thinking, what are you going to do? You got to think about, this. Or not, right? Before you get to high school, you've got to think about what you want to do. Well, there was none of that in the ancient world. Joseph was a carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter. Then he took up preaching. So, okay. All right, moving along. This is the number one thing. Why is it so small, this chart? I know. The main purpose of life is to accumulate and retain honor for one's group and oneself, and keep away shame. This is an honor-shame society, which is the number one thing in life, number one social value. Now, we don't often see the word honor in the New Testament. We see a lot of its synonyms, a lot of its equivalents, like praise and glory, and all sorts of words like that, which, if you add them all up, they're really big in the Bible. So, the honor shame, to collect honor, at least to preserve the honor that your family has, which is its social standing with other people, and internally, how you feel about yourself and your own family. But it's mostly social. Now, across the page, across the column, the main purpose of life in our time is individual happiness. We don't live so much for honor and shame. It's a minor thing to us these days. It used to be strong in Western society up through the Middle Ages, but at the beginning of modern times, it starts to fade away. Because people start thinking about happiness, individual happiness, money, what money can bring. People say money can't buy happiness, but we act like that's not true. The way people emphasize making money and making a profit, that is so. The main purpose of life today is individual happiness, which is usually linked to financial success. How often in the movies and on television don't parents say to children or about children, all I want is for you to be happy? You know, it's almost a cliche so often. But it's true, that's the way people think today. Happiness is the main goal of life, which is important, but pretty soon happiness vanishes. It's fleeting. That's what it's called, happiness, really, the happenstance. Honor and shame are more individual realities and psychological. They're more psychological forces. That's why shame, when it's viewed psychologically, is primarily viewed as a negative thing. Don't shame people. That's bad. Don't shame. Well, if it is psychological only, then it can be destructive. But when it is social, it's socially powerful. So how does this operate in society? If you collect honor, or if you build your honor in a family, let's say you're a father and mother of a good teacher, you raise fine children, that builds your honor. If you work in business, say you've got a farm that husband and wife operate, that if you do well, that will also increase your honor. But if you mess up in life, you will suffer social shame. If you disobey the laws, if you become irreligious, if you do a bad job raising children, for whatever sort of reason, you will suffer social shame that has a tremendous impact on your life. It's not just how people think about you, but it's how people will treat you. If you have a business, for example, say you're an artist, and you become dishonest and you get the reputation for dishonesty, you will suffer shame. That means people aren't going to go to your business anymore. They will act out that feeling toward you, and you will suffer in life. So to reiterate, honor will build your reputation, make you sort of have a happier, a better life, and you will collect honor or get shame yourself or your family. Your life will go suddenly quite bad.
So, this also has some modern ramifications that are not so happy. When you put together patriarchy, male absolute rule, with the honor-shame paradigm in a society, it means that fathers have the right to severely discipline children or even to kill them, right? In the ancient world, in ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt and other places, Mediterranean cultures, if your child, especially a grown child, severely dishonored you, you were forced for the sake of preserving family honor to do something about it and perhaps to kill. Now, this honor killing is still practiced to some extent in Western societies among immigrants from Mediterranean lands. Great Britain and France and Germany have an ongoing problem with immigrants from the Arab world whose children, especially their daughters, they sort of westernize and live by different values, and they shame the family, and the father is almost obliged to kill them on his own. You know, you don't bring it to court, you don't bring it to anybody else, you just act on your own, you get together with your brothers or uncles of the girl, and she's killed. That is, it's brutal, and it is the negative side of this sort of thing, the honor killing that a lot of societies are trying to deal with, and it's hard. Another example I can give is when Yugoslavia dissolved and the Balkan Wars began in the 1990s, and that was a particularly trying time for neighboring nations and for Europe as a whole, because you have these different ethnic groups and religious groups all split now into different enclaves and countries, and they start bashing on each other in very brutal ways. You know, you have all sorts of things that go on. Even when Mary and I were in Dubrovnik a few years ago, they still preserve a lot of the artillery holes in some of their buildings and walls, just to show and remind people there was a war here and it was bad. And we took a shelling from our enemies. Well, when this broke out, Western nations tried to get together and do something about it. And what Bill Clinton, who was president at the time, tried to do was offer them huge financial incentives, to these nations. Stop this conflict, stop your warring, and we will develop your countries. We will rebuild your countries. We will make you rich because of all your resources and your people. Just stop the killing, and we'll give you this money. And it didn't work. They received the offer, but these countries just kept right on fighting. These peoples, these ethnic groups. And Clinton asked some of his advisors, what's going on here? Why don't they take our offer? Why don't they even consider it? And one of his advisors, who thankfully had, I guess, a liberal education, he said, Mr. President, money does not mean very much to these people. They are defending their honor by attacking their traditional enemies. They're settling scores from 300 years ago. 300 years ago, your village killed everybody in my village. And now honor demands that we return the favor and kill them. And he said, so the offer of money was withdrawn. Well, it never went anywhere anyway. Countries that operate on an honor-shame mentality, they operate by a different set of rules, and these rules have to be understood. Seems like I ran out of space on the bottom of the page, but I'll fill it in. The world has limited goods. One must keep the goods of one's group intact, and to get too much money, let's say in business or anything else, say you have a farm or a business, but to become too rich is to leave one social class and is to harm other people, right? Limited goods, it's sort of a zero-sum game. If you get rich, it means other people are getting poor because you're taking their property, their money, their business, their stuff. Now, we in our societies say, this is just competition. This is the American way of life. And it is. It works sort of in certain ways, but not always so well. Across the page, across the column, the world has unlimited goods. Wealth can be created. This is one of our shibboleths. You can create wealth. Yeah? You got all these companies, especially in Holland, doing wealth management, wealth creation. Yeah. So each individual should get as rich as possible. That's it's not a religious obligation, but it's sort of an American thing. Lift yourself up by your bootstraps, become rich. Because rich people, it is said, know how to do society well. We should listen to them when they have political opinions, and they usually do have political opinions because they're so wealthy. And I'm not going to name any names here, but there you go. And that's it for this page. I should pause for questions at this point.
Unfortunately, we don't have the microphone.
Oh, okay. Just speak up. Questions? Any questions at this point? We got more to do a little bit, but.
Sorry about the technology, but it's been working so far.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, James. Did you have your hand up? Yeah, you must have a question.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Maybe you're going to talk about this next time. I was just wondering about this, the moving from the idea that you have to marry within your family to
Right.
marrying outside of your family.
Yeah.
And you may talk about that. I mean, I was reading as a historian of Europe about the Council of Orange in the 6th century, in which the church forbade incest, or it was you can't marry relatives that are very close to you. So
Right.
this was done centuries and centuries ago, and the theory is that that built up Western society because you were forced to trust strangers because you had to marry strangers, or that you and so that was so we just get a very different kind of society about that. Is that something you're going to address? This idea of also Christian notions or Christian traditions that break out of this idea of marrying within your own clan,
your own
and
clan,
family.
your own thing. Right. Yes, I think I can touch on that coming up right now. So, anything else? It's in one of my bullet points here, coming up on the first page. Okay, so we'll look back on the first page. The last full paragraph there. Finally, we examine the differences between Mediterranean culture and Jewish culture. Now, Jewish people in the ancient world are traditionally considered by anthropologists and by biblical scholars to be a part of the wide Mediterranean culture. They are Mediterranean people, right? And for the most part, they do share a lot of the values: honor, shame, kinship, limited goods. They accept these things. But there are some key differences that are coming up. We examine the differesences. These largely come, I think, from Judaism being an ethical monotheism, not just a monotheism, but an ethical monotheism whose ethical system is based upon the nature and the actions of God himself. The repeated, be holy as I am holy. A lot of commandments in the Old Testament, Exodus, Leviticus, and other places, start their lists with God saying, be holy as I am holy. Huh? So it's our holiness comes from God. We act in holy ways and we draw closer to God, all sorts of things there. And in Greco-Roman religions, being what I would call, this is a term I just invented yesterday typing this up, I thought, what to call it? If Judaism is an ethical monotheism, what can we call Greco-Roman religion and culture in general? I call it a non-ethical polytheism. Yeah. Non-ethical polytheism, right. If Judaism is an ethical monotheism, which passes into Christianity, then Greco-Roman religions and wider Greco-Roman culture is, in my opinion, an non-ethical polytheism. Now, what I mean, polytheism, many gods, and the ethics do not derive from the gods. You know, when you're in the ancient Greek and Roman world, your ethics come from your own traditional culture and your cultural values, your tribal values. They don't come from what the gods teach or what they command, because for the most part, Greek and Roman gods are just human beings writ large with all their problems and personality problems and foibles and misdeeds and all sorts of things. Ethics are not based upon Greek and Roman gods, which to us seems very strange, but that's the way it was. And this is why in ancient Greek society, the philosophical schools that arose, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and all the others, they did not base their thoughts on religion. And this is why Socrates got himself in trouble and got himself put to death, because he taught a way of life that was contradicted a lot of Greek religious belief. What you do to the gods in the ancient world, you worship them, you placate them just on occasion, just mostly to keep them away. Sometimes to give blessing, but mostly to make sure they don't bother you, because these gods are not predictable. They're not honest. They're just like human beings, and you just don't want to give them too much attention, so you worship them to keep them away. This is a bit of a caricature, but there's some truth to it. So, reading on, Jewish and later Christian values come from faith based on divine revelation. But Greco-Roman values come from social norms, not religion. And there's a big difference right there. Now, what does this mean in detail? First, the ability of fathers to kill family members is restricted in Jewish life. It's still there, for better or worse, but if a son or a daughter dishonored you or attacked you, physically or whatever, or threatened your life, you had to take that child to the city gates and have a trial at the city gates. And so the village itself would dispense justice according to the law, would determine what the facts are, and would dispense justice. Fathers did not generally, could not, kill children on their own. But in Greco-Roman society, they could. You don't have to go to court, you just act on it. And this is the way honor killings act today. It's what parents do on their own, especially the father. Daughter has dishonored you by marrying somebody. You just take them to your relatives and have the men in the family kill her. So, the ability of fathers to kill family members is restricted. Marriage was usually in the tribe in Jewish life, not the extended family. So when you marry within a tribe, this addresses the question. When you marry in a larger tribe, remember 12 tribes in Israel, and there was some genetic variation between the north and the south and among the northern tribes. And all sorts of other people coming in and marrying. You think of Ruth, this Moabite woman who comes in and contributes Moabite genes to the Jewish bloodline and becomes the great-great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. That, I didn't have enough greats there. But anyway, you marry within the tribe, that gives a wider genetic spread, and the danger of having an incestuous marriage is not there. So, next, the overarching goal of preserving honor is to be held within the strict bounds of God's law. You act honorably by keeping the law of God, which determines honor. It's sort of divine honor and divine shame, which next time I'm going to talk about. Christianity transformed this idea by taking it out of the human realm and putting it in the divine realm. Do we live in a way that is honoring God, and God will honor us? It's not primarily, do we live in such a way that other people are going to think, oh, what a great guy or a great woman she is. Yeah, no, it's not that. It takes it out of the human social realm and puts it in the more religious realm. But that's next week. So the overarching goal of preserving honor is to keep to the law of God. Now, the differences in sexuality were the most noticeable in the Greco-Roman world. This is the likely reason why in the New Testament, lists of sexual immorality, sexual immorality comes first. Now, a lot of critics of Christianity, ancient and modern, would say Christianity is hung up on sex. Yeah? They just don't like that idea. Too much talk about sex, too many restrictions. Why in the New Testament is there all this talk about immorality? Well, I heard one of my professors at Union, Raymond Brown, the late, great Raymond Brown, what a guy, what a wonderful guy. He was asked this question and he said, well, we don't know for sure, but if he were to guess, he would say this is the area of sexual morality that has the greatest difference between Jewish and Christian life and Gentile life. It was the hardest thing to traverse. This is why every New Testament letter, almost every one of Paul's and other letters, talk about the importance of staying away from immorality, prostitution, adultery, all sorts of other things. Stay away from that stuff, because that is a serious business, which in the Greco-Roman world, okay, maybe not. If a father wants to commit adultery, that's fine, but just not in early Christianity. So Brown said, this is probably the area of moral conduct in which there was the greatest gap between Christianity and the Greco-Roman paganism. So this is why in all these vice lists, sexual vices come first. Not because it's a hang-up, but because it's a matter of teaching and it's a matter of acculturation. So, Jews and Christians were forbidden, to talk about the nitty-gritty, forbidden to have sex with prostitutes, even though it's legal and widely done. This passed over from the Jewish to the Christian world. Incest laws, here we go, were stricter, encompassing in-laws as well as blood relatives. Now, why is this? It comes from the Old Testament, from Leviticus, where, probably under the influence of the one flesh doctrine, that a husband and wife, or a man and a woman, especially in the act of sexual intercourse, but not restricted to that brings a one flesh union, which leads to procreation and which Genesis considers a co-creation with God. That we continue the world as God wants it to continue as He created it. So in Leviticus, it is forbidden to marry or have sexual intercourse with any in-laws who are technically not blood relatives. But what happens here is that the one flesh union makes a wife, even though she is not a husband's blood relative, right? Yeah, not a blood relative. It makes her one flesh with him. And it makes her relatives, her sister, her mother, her nieces, everybody else, it makes them a blood relative by extension through the one flesh union of a husband. So incest is given a broader scope, and this means, from a modern scientific point of view, we were thinking about the genetics of this. It gives a wider gene pool for procreation, because you can't have intercourse with that person. If, say, a husband, his wife dies, you cannot remarry a woman who is an in-law because of the marriage that you just had. You have to go outside of that, and this broadens out the scope of things. Now, I think when Christianity adapted this in the early Middle Ages, you might want to respond to this. They were thinking primarily a blood relation. You don't want to marry blood relation because that results in some bad stuff. But what Judaism and early Christianity did was to widen this out by saying, no blood relatives, no in-laws. And this is a lifelong thing. Yeah. Personally, I find the idea of, let's say, marrying a mother-in-law or a sister-in-law, not this fellow, no. No. They're great people, but marry them? No. Okay. Oh boy, I'm going to get myself in trouble on the YouTube. All right. So, next, perhaps most controversially, same-sex intercourse of any sort was strictly forbidden. This was tolerated. It's a strange thing, the contrast between ancient life and modern sensibilities in the Western world. In Greco-Roman societies, same-sex intercourse, especially by men, was considered okay. In Greek life, it was almost a regularity that young men could not be married until they sort sort of establish themselves on their own, which usually meant 25, sometimes even 30 years old, which is getting kind of old. You had a long period of adulthood without a wife. And then you married someone who was quite young. In that period of being single, it was permitted and in some cases almost expected that a man would take a same-sex lover and sort of sow his wild oats or vent himself sexually with that until you get married, and then you leave your lover behind and you take up with your wife. This was very common at the time. But even though it was sort of a cultural given, there was never any thought that same-sex marriage should be permitted. This never occurred to the Greeks or the Romans. This would have been a weird idea. Yeah. In contrast now to our society, where same-sex marriage is quite prevalent and legally permitted in a lot of nations. So the Christian church here is, in some ways, especially conservative Christian churches that keep to traditional Christian teaching on sexuality and marriage, it makes it very hard because we are, conservative churches at least, are pushing up against a strong cultural impetus here. And it's not easy. So same-sex intercourse was forbidden. The church took some hits for that in the early years, but for the most part, it stuck, and people realized this was a good thing. So with the triumph of Christianity in the Roman Empire and in the wider world, it was carried out this way. And Islam, too, took at its early rise, it took a lot of its moral teaching from Judaism, from the Old Testament, even though it does not admit to this borrowing. There it is, you could see it in the Quran and other places. A lot of these ideas of incest and marriage and sexuality came into the Muslim world as well. So there you have it. And questions or comments? Anybody? Oh, you're nice and quiet. Could be.
Green. Is this a live one? Am I on?
You're on.
Oh.
Okay.
I feel empowered, as they say. About in the 1840s, I think the RCA, at least here in this area and other places, were changing their views on marrying your deceased wife's sister. That used to be a no-no. And in the Reformed Church, that was one thing. And I've been reading a little bit about. This is another thing you talked about earlier about young betrothals. Well, that was common in European royalty, I know, in the time of Henry VIII and so on, when they would get betrothed virtually from infancy, some of these royals.
Yeah.
And that was and speaking of royals there, the Habsburgs did a lot of intermarriage, which was kind of incestuous, and they ended up with strange chins, I believe my wife informs me.
And sometimes strange rulers, yeah.
It eventually died out, but that's all I'm going to say.
You want to pass it up?
Okay, question right here? Yeah. Yes.
Could you speak a little bit more to the relationships between people within the family unit in terms of like how the children would interact with their parents on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. Well, in terms of general Mediterranean life, the father of the family often was primarily related outside the family for the sake of the family business, whether it's a farm or something. The father was a little bit more distant, powerful but distant. He would dispense discipline if need be, and we'll talk about this next time. But for the most part, he was in charge of the wife, and the children. The mother, of course, was more restricted to the home. Now, if it was a business based in the home, she'd often have things to do with that. And a lot of businesses, especially farm, you have to remember, of course, that these are all primarily agrarian societies, a lot of farming. So you have the mother participating in that. And children, of course, would, depending on their social class, they would go to school sometimes or be trained by a pedagogue. Sometimes, if there was enough money in the family, there would be 1 or 2 slaves who would help, who are also considered part of the household. Now, I did talk about this term household. The Greek word oikia was very powerful, that the extended family was not just father, mother, and kids, but in a sense it was also the slaves who lived in the house permanently, lifelong. A lot of them, if you bought a slave, captured a slave who had skills like reading or writing or mathematics or farming, they would be put to use in that sort of thing. So this gave the parents a little bit more latitude as well. So, yeah. So, biologically speaking, the biological construction of the family reality is that father's father and mother's mother. Because the mother would have to nurse children and feed them that way, that kept her sort of in the house and with the kids. And they just carried on in this way. So then when the children would get old enough, when it looked like they would live probably to young adulthood, then matchmaking started, or the father and the mother together would determine who in the wider society would make a good match, and they would arrange with the other parents to do this. And as soon as the children reached adolescence, puberty, where they could have children, they would be married, because life at this time was precarious. If you wanted your family to continue, you married and produced children as soon as possible. Yeah. So usually, this was especially true of women, young women in the family. They were married off as soon as they reached puberty. 1 or 2 months later, bam, you were married. Or actually, you're married and then comes the kabam. So, yeah, that was a joke. Flopped, okay. So, yes.
45 years ago, I had experienced a revelation as a Hope student that to become a good doctor, I need to know something about everybody's religious belief system. Mm-hmm. I've grown up in a Caucasian and Latino mix.
Yep.
But suddenly all these Southeast Asian families were coming and bringing new ideas.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I'm wondering about your take on the Judaic culture versus Greco-Roman culture regarding evidence-based versus belief system.
Bob, it is 12:15, and we try to bring it to a hard stop. Do you want to pick up on this next week?
Yeah, let me think about that, Russ. We'll pick that up next time, okay? Yeah, that's a good question for next time. So,
can you wait? Okay.
Thanks a lot for listening, folks. I know this has been sort of challenging, but next time it's going to be more inspiring, okay? I promise.
Well, thank you very much. We look forward to its continuation.
Thank you.